When it comes to front-end development interviews, CSS is an absolutely crucial part. So, in this explainer, we're going to break down the core concepts that will help you crack any CSS interview, starting right from the foundations and going all the way to modern responsive design. Let's get started.
So, do you want to walk into your next CSS interview feeling completely confident? Well, you're in the right place. Let's take a look at everything we're going to cover.
We're going to tackle this in 5 main sections. We'll kick things off with the absolute foundation of CSS. Then we'll look at how elements control their flow on the page. After that, we'll dive into modern layouts like Flex and Grid, then cover positioning, and finally, wrap up with the magic of specificity and responsive design. Ready? Let's go.
Okay, our first section is all about the CSS foundation, and the single most important rule here is this. Every HTML element, whether it's text or an image, is a box. Understanding this one concept is the absolute first step to mastering CSS.
This idea is called the CSS Box Model. This model is what decides how much space your elements take up on a web page and how much room is around them, and it all breaks down into 4 distinct layers.
To understand these 4 layers, just imagine a framed picture. Right in the middle is your content. That's the actual picture. The space between the picture and the frame itself, that's the padding. The frame itself is, you guessed it, the border. And finally, the space between this picture frame and another one on the wall is the margin. Simple, right?
Margin and padding often cause a bit of confusion. Just remember this. Margin is the outer space, the gap between 2 different elements, and padding is the inner space, the room inside an element between its content and its border. And here's another key difference. The margin is always transparent, while the padding will actually take on the background color of the element.
All right, so we know every element is a box, but how do these boxes actually behave next to each other on the page? That's what we'll figure out in Section 2, and it's all controlled by the display property.
So here's a comparison of the 3 main display values. Block elements, like a div, always start on a new line and take up the full available width. Inline elements, like a span, just take up as much space as they need and don't create a new line. An inline-block is kind of the best of both worlds. It stays in line with other content, but you can still control its width and height. Now we're getting to the most powerful tools in modern CSS, Flexbox and Grid. Before these came along, making complex layouts with things like floats and positioning was a real headache, but these two have made it all so much easier.
So when should you use Flexbox and when should you use Grid? The simple rule is Flexbox is for one-dimensional layouts. That is, aligning things in either a row or a column, like in a navbar. Grid is for 2-dimensional layouts, where you need to control both rows and columns at the same time, like for the entire structure of a page.
The easiest way to get your head around Flexbox is to understand its 2 axes. First step, set the main axis using flex direction, either row or column. Second step, use justify content to align things along that main axis, and align items to align them on the perpendicular axis, the cross axis. And that's pretty much it.
And what about CSS Grid? Well, it's a super powerful 2D layout system. Just think of it like a spreadsheet where you have complete control over both the rows and the columns. This lets you place any element on the page with absolute precision.
Okay, so far we've seen how elements live inside the normal flow of the page. But what if we need to take an element out of its default position and place it somewhere else? Well, that's exactly what positioning is for.
In CSS, there are 4 main positioning values. Relative lets you nudge an element from its original spot. Absolute pulls it completely out of the normal flow. Fixed locks an element to the screen, like a floating button, and sticky is a cool mix of the two, like a navbar that scrolls and then sticks to the top.
Now when you start positioning elements, they can end up overlapping, so which one appears on top? That's controlled by z-index. Think of it like a stack of books. The book with the highest z-index number is the one that sits on top of the pile.
I am sure you've seen code like z-index 9999 before. Developers often use this as a magic number to make sure their element, like a pop-up modal, always stays on top. It's a quick fix, but in bigger projects, it can be a sign that the stacking context isn't being managed as well as it could be.
All right, we're on to our final section. Here, we'll look at 2 crucial concepts. First, the rules that decide which CSS style actually gets applied, and second, the magic that makes our layouts adapt perfectly to any screen size.
So, what is CSS specificity? Well, if you have 2 different style rules targeting the same element, how does the browser decide which one to apply?
It uses the rules of specificity. It's kind of like a VIP entry list. Some selectors just have a higher priority than others. And here is that hierarchy. The most powerful, the ultimate VIP, is an inline style. Right below that, you have an ID selector, then come classes, and finally, at the bottom, are the basic element selectors. This means an ID selector will always override a class selector style, no contest.
Now, for a really important question, how do we apply different styles for different screen sizes, like for a mobile phone, a tablet, and a desktop? The answer lies in responsive design.
And the magic behind this is something called media queries. You can think of them as the if statements of CSS. You're basically telling the browser, if the screen size is this wide, then apply these specific styles. It's how websites look one way on a phone and completely different on a desktop.
Choosing the right units is also essential for responsive design. PX is a fixed unit. M is relative to its parent element's font size, which can get tricky. That's why the best practice is often to use rem, which is relative to the root HTML element's font size, making it much more predictable. And for full screen layouts, VW or viewport width is definitely your best friend.
So there you have it, the key concepts that will make you a much stronger CSS developer. Understand these, practice them, and you will absolutely crack your next CSS interview. And before we go, I'll leave you with a question. Which of these concepts do you find the trickiest? Give it some thought.